Welcome back. So Philip Ittner is in Kiev with us right now. We've got questions from our chat room as per usual. And Jimmy the Geek saying, Hal, stop pushing buttons. It's the only way I can get us on. Basically, I'm the Wizard of Oz right now. Just pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. It's good advice.
Told me to share with you, don't mess with it too much, Hal.
I will say for the record that I mess with it just enough. You can be heard, I can be heard, they can be heard, and Chicago can hear us. That is just enough. All right. So, there's a lot of questions that I have this week. One of the biggest stories out of Ukraine this week, and we were talking during the break, of the hilarity of MTG basically saying we need to stop being a part of NATO, essentially, and Europe's not our problem, and our engagement with them is not. That doesn't help the average American, and I mean the absurdity of it is on its face. It's just goofy. She's falling back in many of her other statements. The stuff that's so nuts that people miss the QAnon level stuff she was saying. Which she used to say before she got elected, and now she's just back on 100%. Well, 80%, I would say, because she's still slightly aware that some things are third rails. Jimmy Dore, formerly of TYT and currently of the voting sucks, don't do it left. It's the best way to fix things is to let the Republicans destroy it crowd, which, by the way, Anna Kasparian from TYT has joined fully. I can't wait for their spinoff show. Madness ensues. But Jimmy Dore declared, as a voice of the left, that Ukraine is a failed state. That's a direct quote. Not that it's losing the war, not that it, because it lost Lysychansk, however temporarily, like they lost Kharkiv and got it back, which is a much bigger city, or as they're gaining Kherson, for example, which are giant, meaningful cities, that by bogging down the Russians in Severodonetsk and then pulling back out of Lysychansk and drawing this power out, that the Russians are literally low on humans at this point. It's been admitted by the Russians themselves just from that process to effectively strategically take Toledo. That's the best.
Yeah, the entire Donbass is roughly the size of Yellowstone Park.
Mm-hmm. Right.
That's the entire Donbass.
Right.
And it's taken them 4.5, almost 5 months to take it. If you include, since February 24th. If you want to even be generous and say, since they focused on solely the Donbass and pulled away from the capital.
Yeah, right. Since they lost their other stuff. Yeah.
And they weren't able to take Yellowstone Park.
Right.
And you're right. They are running low on running low on manpower to the extent that there are widespread reports of Wagner Group, this kind of
Wagner Group,
paramilitary mercenary group that's funded by the Kremlin, it's kind of supported by the Kremlin, going into prisons in St. Petersburg and offering amnesty and meager pay to Russian prisoners if they will go and fight in the war. If they're doing that, those reports are true, and there are several reports of them doing this.
The enemy of my enemy is cannon fodder, I guess.
Yeah, and why would you do that if everything was going fine? You wouldn't. So it's
right.
Well, is it Wagner or Wagner?
It's Wagner. I call it Wagner. But it's named after. I'm trying to train the media. The big conversation we had about Kiev versus Kyiv and all that conversation. Mm-hmm. I think there's a way more meaningful conversation to be had about the Wagner Group, because it's named after Hitler's favorite composer.
Oh, boy.
Yeah. Who wrote Das Spectre, Zarathustra, and Ride of the Valkyries.
Yes. So specifically, they want to say Wagner because it sounds very again, I will not lay this at Robert Wagner's feet. I am too big a heart-to-heart fan. But yeah, so anyway, we've got some questions from the chat already.
Sure,
and
absolutely.
We'll get to one before we
ask questions 5 minutes after we start, like an hour before Phil even shows up.
Right.
Oh, God.
That's okay. It's good because we're starting to load them in, right?
All right, let's do it.
Let's do it. Tech. Is the Russian army, we kind of touched on this, is the Russian army running low on ammo?
They're certainly going through it. Some 60,000 rounds a day, apparently, according to former President Petro Poroshenko. And they're clearly having to adjust because they're using munitions that aren't intended for what they're doing. I keep going back to the Kremenchuk shopping mall when they shot at it with an anti-ship missile. You know, you don't use ordnance like that against a shopping center, against a land-based target, you know, a land-based target, unless you're running low on ammunition.
Once you spook a shopping center, it's hard to track down.
That's right. Yes, it was the world's first floating shopping center. The other, I mean, there's been a lot of talk. The politics of Belarus, I think, are one of the more difficult things to understand in this. And this new push, there's this weird anti-Poland thing that's been coming up in the last few weeks in particular, that I think could deserve a quick dive at some point. Let's take a break real quick, and we're going to come back after this break. And that might be, that's my point of privilege question, because first of all, I'm sure it's centuries deep, but also acute to World War II, and still some people alive and chafing from territory they thought Poland didn't deserve. Just like Finland. We'll be back right after this. You're listening to the Hal Sparks radio program, Mega Worldwide, on WCPT Radio, Chicago's Progressive Talk.
The Hal Sparks radio program, Mega Worldwide.
Love that I can actually hear. Welcome back to the show. I'm so happy when I can just hear the regular break music, and it's almost like we're back to normal production. It's so lovely.
Yeah.
By the way, I'm just going to chalk these up to attacks by Russian trolls on technology. I mean, they do it if they could, so why not? You know, I mean, I'm just going to leave it at that. I mean, it's not out of the question.
There's an entire military division that does nothing but disrupt.
That's right. Well, it's not like they can build anything. What are you going to do? Buy a Russian VPN? Or like my favorite thing was there was Russian security software, the most singular software that was used that came from Russia. Yes, was this Russian security software, which is just goofy. Like, of all places, it's like it's like the question of Chinese CCTV cameras having the ability to, whatever network you're on, also send signal to whoever made it. You know, that was the idea. They found a bunch of chips in these cameras that were being made, where if you put up this particular brand of Chinese camera, that anybody who set up a relay in China could just look at those cameras anywhere in the world. Yeah. We didn't use them a lot. A lot of the images came back from UK, who were buying them hand over fist, because there's more cameras in the UK, in the UK than anywhere on Earth per capita. China has more in general, and Russia is a close second. But human to human, the UK has fewer. Anyways, we got more questions in that, but I wanted to touch on sort of the Poland aspect of this.
You want to talk a little bit about Poland?
Yeah, because Lukashenko and the whole, like, will Belarus be a puppet? Are they currently being a puppet state of Russia functionally, or is he trying to pull away? Is he looking to overtake Putin? That kind of general politics. Part of what's come out of that is this weird element of Belarus being, bordered close to Poland, and their issues with, the Kaliningrad issue, and them being a satellite state that is effectively what Putin would want at best for Ukraine. At worst, he might do worse to Belarus after he's done. But the Polish issue is the one that confuses me the most geopolitically. Why they still care, or what the power play is there, they think.
You mean the Russian narrative that they're trying to put out, that Poland is going to come and try and take back Lviv?
Right.
Well, I mean, that's because they're playing on the divisions within Ukrainian society, and they are also, I think, really lost in the previous century. They still think that it's Napoleonic, land grabs and things like that, and eventually
Germanic tribes fighting over the Austro-Hungarian Empire.
To take back But I've said this before, and I'll say it again, and it's important for everybody to remember. The stretch of land between the Adriatic and the Black Sea has been this stretch of territory, and then if you also include up to the North Sea with the Baltic states, that whole section of this whole section of Europe has been fought over for centuries, and it's been passed back and forth, and it's the people have come through here, and they've tried to conquer it for their own imperial purposes, and because of the disruption for so many centuries throughout the 20th century and now into the 21st, the discussion of who owns this territory has caused both the First, the Second, and the Second World War. The First World War, it was the breakup of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and their satellite states trying to be free, and then in the world, them trying to grab Poland and divide up Poland, and this is the last stretch of land that is even remotely contested. This country, this is probably the longest period of self-determination that Ukraine has had since like the 16th century.
Right.
They had a couple of brief windows in the 20th century. They've had an independence movement for the better part of 2 centuries. But this country called Ukraine is kind of an anomaly, and it's not something that's existed before. And so the Russians, and because it's kind of a hodgepodge of territories, as those empires came through, they left their own residual kind of communities. And so this has been a disparate country, Ukraine. And the Russians have tried to stress on those divisions. It's not working, though. And so I think that's why they're doing this.
Even in the United States, like
East Galicia thing.
The irony is that the separatist region that they would want to focus on in the United States in particular, and the noise we've heard about it in Texas with the Texas GOP's platform, that they need to vote on secession, which would be a very disappointing vote for them, I think they would find, and a very embarrassing moment that would actually drive that state more purple than it is. One of the reasons why Russia's had less effect in doing that is that the secession from geographically of Texas would make it its own country between the United States and Mexico after having shunned the United States. So its option as far as its own land security, if you looked at it as a state in and of itself, would be whatever resources they can come up with on their own as quickly as possible, while they get overrun by Mexican drug cartels. Like the Russians have been trying to support separatist movements around the West for at least the last decade and a half. They have every year they have an event in Moscow, and they invite separatist guys from all around the world, whether it's the Catalans in Spain or the Basque community, or even, they invite, free Californians, Californian free staters or Texas or, whatever, because they're looking to break us up. But what I find interesting is that, of course, they invite all the separatists movement, and the whole conference that happens annually probably won't happen again this year, but normally happens annually. The whole purposes of it is like, these little republics should have self-determination and not live under the thumb of these despotic Western powers. They never, however, invite, say, the Dagestanis, the Ingush, the Ossetians, the Yakutians, the Chechens, the Georgians.
Interestingly enough, they're not really as open-minded when it comes to their own republic.
This is anytime someone is selling you on the idea of single-sided hegemony in the world, that there is one country that is behind all the hegemony in the world, they are more than likely a aligned with another country seeking their own hegemony. And in this particular case, that's been the battle east and west between Russia and the U.S. for a long time, as far as a battle of words and propaganda and stories. And the same thing happened to some degree with the CCP under Xi Jinping, is this idea that we got to stop this whole one state America thing where they run everything, which isn't how the world works. But that's the illusion for a long time. Not ironically enough, so that there isn't one country running the whole thing, but so that they can be the dominant force. And Russia's doing it the same game plan, has for years. And that's why I would argue that the 1991 collapse was actually a rope-a-dope if you really look at it strategically from a chess standpoint. That said, they're not going to be able to do it. Even if they wanted to, they couldn't maintain this, because that requires a tremendous amount of creative endeavor. It takes a lot of work, it takes a lot of buildup. And even China in the BRI, which is where they were trying a different tack on this, they needed to associate it with, one hand is a debt trap, and the other hand is, we're going to give you a bunch of money to build a bunch of bridges, but you got to use these Chinese companies to do it. And we're going to bring in our own workers to do it. So we're just using your land to keep our workers busy, because idle hands are the devil's workshop, and we've got too many people. And the minute they realize they're screwed, we're in trouble. So we got to ship them off to other countries. In many ways, it's what Cuba does with their doctors in Latin America. They make a lot of money there, and they can send it back to their family. So it becomes this cycle where they're effectively enslaving their doctors in some ways, but using this sort of puffery that, isn't that nice what we're doing for other people? So anyways, let's we got 3 minutes before the break. Let's grab a question from the chat.
Question? Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, here's one that has been asked by a couple different people. Is there any update on Putin's health?
On Putin's health? No,
Yes.
no update. No update, and he has been looking better. There are those out there who say, I hate to quote him, but Oliver Stone recently saying that, yes, he did have cancer, but he licked it, in Stone's words. Oliver Stone is not a reliable source. But Putin, he just delivered this address to the Duma, and he looked okay. He was still spewing nonsense, but he looked okay.
He's still puffy, but they're definitely working on him. They're and they're also giving him breaks between stuff. Part of that also is just the beginning of this war. I have no doubt that he was up at all hours and running himself ragged while he's still got these problems. So on top of that, everybody will be a little tired and bagged out, as these things go along. I will say that, for the record, one of the recurring characteristics of Oliver Stone was that, famously, I think it was during JFK, that on set he would just whip out his crank and pee on set instead of going to the bathroom in front of crew, all of whom, by the way, aren't men, and all of whom, even when they are men, aren't cool with seeing the director's crank whenever he decides to dangle it in front of everybody. He also preemptively did this big Putin interview where he followed the dude around and went, "You're kind of awesome. Why does the world think you're not awesome?"
Yeah, he has a love affair with Putin.
It's absolutely really, and especially considering his sort of, and maybe it's in line with it. Maybe this is the worst of the McCarthyistic fever dreams of commies among us and the Red Scare, having a point to it in some corners. 20% truth, but 80% garbage. The 20% truth might be the fact that Oliver Stone's been one of these guys who's like, nonstop the whole world, like the U.S. is the problem. Our Western society, natural born killers. The JFK assassination. Our government is a failed state. It's crap. All of it lines up to point.
Russia knows that, and it speaks to that audience, whether it's Stone, whether it is Jimmy Dore, whether it's MTG, whether it's all sorts of different people. They know exactly how to get inside our heads, gaslight us, and be like, no, the problem is America. Everything's bad with it. That's the only problem. If we could just, break up America, the world would be a much better place.
Yeah, it would reset to a weird, puffy utopia. Yeah.
They attack us knowing the weaknesses that we have and the dissatisfaction that people have with the American experiment, like Stone, and they just ramp it right up, and it feeds right into their.
We got to take a break, which I would argue, though, again, is kind of like the burning of the American flag. The burning of the American flag shows that people are not happy about the state of America when they do it. But the fact that you can burn the American flag is why it's so worthwhile. Burning the American flag, it's like striking down Obi-Wan. If you burn it, you make it stronger, because one of the things it stands for is your ability to burn it. And people who try to outlaw, people who try to outlaw the burning of the flag are people who diminish its worth more than the people who burn it. And the people like Oliver Stone, who will crap all over America, prove its worth as a country because they're able to do it, because he's able to make any movie he makes and say whatever he wants and do any interviews he wants. And the government never comes for him. And the government that he's puffing up, in this case, Vladimir Putin's, would never allow that, and is currently engaged in stopping that violently. So we got to take a break. We'll be back right after this. It's the Hal Sparks Radio program, Mega Worldwide. Follow at Philip Ittner, 1L, 2 T's on Twitter, and check out his vlog on YouTube that he's doing from Ukraine with great regularity. And he also joins us here and on the live stream on Wednesdays for a bit, anyways, until he comes stateside. We'll be back right after this.
This is Damian Perdue of Think Theory Radio, Saturdays at 6 p.m. You're listening to Hal Sparks' radio program, Mega Worldwide.
I thought there was going to be like a new one every break. I was so excited.
You want more, Hal? We'll give you more. Hal Sparks' radio program, Mega Worldwide, on Chicago's Progressive Talk, WCPT 820. Hoo-yah!
We're back with our dear friend Philip Ittner. He's live in Ukraine right now. And Johnny Million, of course, going through the questions in the chat room for him. I would take calls and try to institute that in the future, but I would rather solve all my other audio issues before we try to jump that shark. What's the next one up, Johnny, in the stack?
I got one from
Connie
Kelly.
Before we go on to that, actually, quickly before we go on to that, I've already announced that at some point I'm going to be coming back to the States.
Right.
I have some obligations that I need to take care of in California and in Michigan. So I am going to come back. And when I'm back in the States, I'm going to get some new equipment. I'm going to get, maybe I need a new laptop, for example, and a couple other things. And I'll try and get down to LA so that we can sit, across from one another. But we can definitely talk more about, streamlining this and making this work better for everybody.
Yeah, it'll be great.
Anyhow, okay, so onward to the questions.
Yeah, I've got one from Connie Kelly. They're asking, why were the Russians allowed to bomb Snake Island? Why didn't they take out the planes?
So why didn't the Ukrainians take out the planes that were bombing Snake Island? Do I understand that correctly?
All I see is, why were the Russians allowed to bomb Snake Island? Why didn't they take out the planes?
Well, it's my understanding they may have actually used drones to do that.
Yes.
And they're very difficult. Especially, look, they're increasingly in this war. Both sides are starting to develop electronic countermeasures to knock drones out of the sky. But because Snake Island is out in the middle of the Black Sea, I don't think that they were able to employ any kind of system to knock the drones down. So they flew over. What's interesting to me about that whole thing is not why didn't they shoot them down, but rather why did the Russians feel the need to do it if it was if it was a peaceful withdrawal from Snake Island?
Yeah, that was they had previously
Moscow made.
Right. They previously said
goodwill.
We're leaving on purpose. As a show of goodwill,
but oh, by the way, we still need to send drones in to blow up stuff we left behind because we were rushing out.
Right.
And then also subsequently, we have seen the Ukrainians get on boats and go out to Snake Island and raise the yellow and the blue flag. Yeah, which was a gutsy thing to do. Gutsy thing to do.
Yep.
And I'm sure it was only temporary and it was only symbolic, but.
Well, I would also say that if the Russians, I would argue that not that we need anything to put the lie to what they say ever, but if they strike the island because it's got a flag on it now, that will, go even further. So by putting that flag there, it's, flags are, as all deference to Eddie Izzard, flags were a warning sign. It was better than a head on a pike. It was less violent, but it was like, this is our ground. Don't come here. We're not going to litter the area with your dead, but just, we're claiming this. If you want to lay claim to it, let's talk. But don't do anything. Otherwise, we go back to heads on pikes instead of flags. And that was how it was forever. Until, the flag was the new invention. Like, here's a nice way of saying we live here.
Yeah.
Peter's asking what's strategic about Snake Island. For the Russians, a lot. For the Ukrainians, just not having the Russians there, I would say. From that point,
Yeah, it's a good position to help in any kind of blockade of shipping coming out of Odessa in particular. So it's for the Russians, it would be a good spot to put a missile battery. But aside from that, no. I mean, it's a tiny little island.
I heard, by the way, honking behind you, Philip. Clearly signs of a failed state. In deference to the storyline of MTG and Jimmy Dore, where they're literally saying that Ukraine is, and I quote, a failed state. The cartoonish level, by what you can say one thing about, like, you believe this is maybe negotiations and peace. That's the soft pedal version of that, where we should just be able to let's just let Russia have what they have, and there needs to be peace so people aren't killed. And like, you can say that that's truly maybe the anti-war version, even though you're supporting ultimately the Russian acts of aggression in stages, because they didn't.
One of the most heartening things I've seen in the last week or so is the Ukrainians going into recently recovered territories or areas where they couldn't get to previously because they were still clearing them of unexploded ordnance, and going where the first things that they've been doing is going to senior citizens, to old age pensioners, and bringing in their pension, which is only like $100 or $200, but it's a world of difference for them. But they made a point, the Ukrainians made a point of, like, we haven't been able to get you your pension for the last 4 months because of the war. Now we are going to first and foremost make sure that you have money and food and all that kind of stuff. So that's not a failed state, And then
they've also made their bond payments. And for the record, Russia has not. Russia defaulted on their bond payments for the first time since 1917. And Ukraine is still paying interest on the bonds that they have, and they will continue to once. And again, if I suppose if the other countries that are supporting them want them paid back, you would want them to win, because if Russia's going to not pay back Ukrainian war bonds, I suppose, or whatever they are, there's a high sign that would happen. Anyways, let's we can grab another question before we get to this break.
Sure.
Yeah, Seattle Susie Q is asking, is Zelensky getting pressured to negotiate peace by giving up some land?
That exists. I don't think he's being overly pressured by Western powers. I have seen what I have seen in Western powers statements. Ultimately, it's up to the Ukrainians. I have seen it repeatedly, this narrative of, like, ultimately it is up to the Ukrainians to make that decision, and we cannot make that. And that is 100% the right way to do it, because this country has been a colony of other greater empirical powers for the majority of its history. And if we come in here and start treating this place like a colony and telling them what to do, they will not take it from Brussels. They will not take it from D.C., just as they will not take it from Moscow. And we better wrap our heads around that.
Again, I would like to say the only state giving them any such ultimatum. The
arguments that we see of this whole, and this comes back to the Doors and the MTGs and all those guys. We need to make sure that these aggressive Ukrainians stop fighting, because inevitably Russia's going to win anyhow. So all you're doing now is just you're
prolonging the inevitable. Right.
Well, I think if you ask the vast majority of Ukrainians in this country who are exhausted by this war, do not misunderstand me, but they will say to you, as tired as I am of this war, we would rather have a solid peace with a properly negotiated victory than a bad victory, with the acquiescing territory. So,
well, the other thing
Ukraine's
is
going to keep fighting.
If the idea that Russia could or should win in Ukraine and take over the country and make it a satellite state in many ways, is the second question that must follow that is, do you wish the same judicial system that is happening to Brittany Griner on every Ukrainian, or for that matter, every Moldovan, or eventually every Chechen or Latvian or Lithuanian, because that is what they have said their plan is.
Yeah. There's a professor out in Ekaterinburg who's just been sentenced to something like 17 years because he had the audacity to say that he didn't support the war. That was the only thing he said. He didn't want the war. And I saw a picture of him in the dock because they put him in cages, and he's holding up a sign that says, "Do you still need this war?" Basically to the Russian people. And for that, he's going to go away for 17 years, hard labor.
And the idea that anybody, including Oliver Stone or anybody who says, and there's a great, the phrase I brought it up last week, America right or my country right or wrong, has been a kind of phrase that has been used as a jingoistic kind of phrase for a long time. But the actual phrase is, my country right or wrong, if right to be kept right, if wrong to be made right. And that is a uniquely that is unique to democracy, and it is specifically unique to the American ideal for a very long time. In Russia, that's not an option. My country right or wrong is literally, that's the choice they have. They don't have a choice to make it right. They don't have a choice to correct those wrongs. They're stuck with it. They have to, that patriotism is an enforced behavior, not a felt behavior in any way. And the fact that people have an option, again, to feel disenfranchised, to feel that they don't feel represented in a representative democracy, is the point, to some degree, of being in a democracy. That you can do something about it. You can get somebody elected. You can run yourself. You can voice those concerns. That guy is doing 17 years for holding up a sign. We can't even fathom that over here. And it's an absurdity to even suggest something like that would be a law over here. All the way across the spectrum in the United States. All the way across. Left to right, all the way across. That would be ridiculous. And that is the law in Russia. And to wish that on the Ukrainian people or the Lithuanians or the Georgians or anybody else is, I think, a sign of cruelty. We'll be back right after this. It's the House Sparks Radio program, mega worldwide on WCPT Radio, Chicago's Progressive Talk.